Dear audience, thank you for being here. Thank you, Élie, for being here.
Thank you.
We're super lucky because Élie was in London, and so this kind of worked out perfectly. We've known each other for a few years, and today we're going to, we asked him to talk about speculation in two different ways mainly. One that is financial and one metaphysical, and this will go into the speculative realism that you probably read as one of the hooks in the newsletter that you received. Élie used to be a trader. Like, he actually hit the ground at the stock exchange. I don't even know where. Paris.
In Paris in '87.
Okay, in '87.
The day the market crashed, actually.
Exactly. So.
For those of you who remember or not even born.
No, we were not even born. None of us was born, really, apart from Stuart. And then in 1998, he founded this company called Ito33 that basically produces and sells this super complicated, sophisticated software to
pricing of derivatives. Which is a very cutting edge and a very specialized market and industry.
Exactly.
That I will, of course, explain to you completely.
Exactly, which I completely absorbed so much that I cannot say a word, but it's fine. That's the point of the keyword for dummies. At the end of it, we will be all experts. But on top of that, Élie has been writing, basically like, okay, he's got this business, but he spends his days writing, really. And in 2010, he wrote this groundbreaking, maybe not for all of us, but for the field, book called The Black Swan. The Blank Swan, that was in response to The Black Swan, which was this other fairly famous book about probability, improbability, and all that kind of realm of things. And in 2015, he wrote this other book, which the bulletin that you can read on the website of the Sterling Library is in a way kind of connected to, which is The Medium of Contingency, which expands and kind of further explains what he thinks, or how he basically, let's put it this way, does metaphysical speculation on financial speculation. That's probably the way to put it.
Yeah, this is where it comes together.
Yeah, exactly. So we thought, okay, the best person ever to actually do a double keyword for dummies, so it's like double difficult, in the sense that in 1 hour we need to, at least we try, to unpack or tackle all these very, for me at least, complicated words and processes and mechanisms around financial speculation on the one end, and then on the other side, the metaphysical speculation. So, let's see. I'm going to be here just as a watchdog, so I'm not going to ask questions because I think it's going to be too difficult. But I'm going to tell you, like, to slow down, or like to explain, or like make another example and all that kind of stuff. So
and also, if for some reason I feel that the audience is not following, I just
and it's like we see that everyone is going like that. I'm going to say that. Come on. Okay, like that. Okay, to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Francesca and Stuart, for having me. As Francesca has said, the reason why I'm interested, of course, and I think I can talk a little bit about speculation is that because I'm involved in the two threads of thinking concerning speculation. First of all, the financial speculation, because in '87, this was the first day in my career, and for the following 9 years, I worked as a trader in the open outcry market. So for 9 years, I was down there on the floor, shouting, buying and selling from the rest of the crowd. So really in the middle of the market and in the middle of the financial speculation as people have heard about it and as people fear it also, because I was a trader in derivatives, and you know that derivatives have a bad reputation in being disconnected from the real economy or from the material economy and being only bets, on air or nothing. So by the way, this interplay between matter, meaning what is really concrete and what is real, the interplay between that and abstraction and derivative will be also at the heart of my talk today, and also at the heart of the metaphysical thinking that I will conduct. So I was a trader for 9 years. Then when I got tired of that, because really it requires a young age to be standing on the floor for like 8 hours shouting every day, And also I started becoming a little bit anxious about my career, because basically if you go to the market, you have nothing in your head. You have to go completely empty-headed in order only to react to the events. Anyone who goes to the market with prejudice or with a preformed opinion is doomed to fail. So I wasn't acting as an investor, I was really acting as a market maker. So somebody who goes to the floor, and only by listening to people who want to buy from me or sell to me, I would react. And by the way, to me, that's the only way to make money consistently in the market, is to have no idea, so be completely empty-headed. Again, think always about the difference between matter and void, and be a market maker. But we'll come to that later. So when I got tired of that, I retired from the market, and for 3 years I thought a little bit about the theory which was underlying what I knew practically. And this, of course, I had graduated as an engineer anyway when I was hired by the bank, so I had an engineering background. But the theory that I got interested in for 3 years, so I stopped working for 3 years and went to the bank only part-time, to help them around, was really getting in the depths of probability theory and derivative pricing theory, which I will not try to explain tonight, but that what really drove me to creating the company in '98, where I understood that you could create software that was a little bit more advanced than what was the common practice in those days. So I created this company, which still exists today, and it's a very cutting-edge software that we develop, whose customers or people who subscribe to it are traders in derivatives, so mainly located either in trading desks of investment banks or in hedge funds that do that. And during the development of the software and of the thinking about the theory underlying it, this is where I encountered what I call a metaphysical problem. To cut a long story short, this is where I discovered that probability theory and even pricing theory, as I had studied in school, in engineering or in books, really did not apply to the market as such. On the contrary, the market of derivatives posed a paradox, which I might maybe have time to explain later, but that in any way drove me into writing articles and into writing 2 books that Francesca had mentioned, where I became a metaphysician of finance and of financial markets, especially derivatives. So trying to think about what should be thought differently than the received view in the foundation of probability theory and in the foundation of mathematical finance, in order to make sense of the paradox of the market that I had encountered. And in this investigation, crucial in my reading and in my putting together of my thought, was encountering the book of Meillassoux. I don't know if you've heard about him, Quentin Meillassoux, a young French philosopher who wrote a book in 2006, which I read then because in French, before it was translated by Ray Brassier. And so that was a book nothing to do with finance at all. It was a book in pure metaphysics. But I was struck, so the title of the book was After Finitude, but I was struck by the subtitle of the book, which was an essay in the necessity of contingency. And because necessity and contingency are 2 keywords in probability theory and in derivatives, because contingent claim is the other word for derivatives, I was completely drawn to that book. And there is something which I will explain at the end of the talk if we get there, something in that book by Quentin Meillassoux, which is really a revolutionary book in terms of putting upside down the whole tradition of metaphysical speculation, going down from Leibniz, and turning upside down how Immanuel Kant had responded to that. And it's through that book, because of course I had some knowledge of philosophy, but more as a philosopher of science. So I knew about the philosophy of probability and the philosophy of quantum mechanics as part of my training as a scientist. But I had no acquaintance yet with metaphysical speculation as such, which is unscientific, if you will. On the contrary, the philosophy of science that I had learned was completely analytical tradition, completely empirical, so therefore completely foreign to any notion of speculation, to any notion of thinking things in absolute terms, etc. But nevertheless, I was drawn to Quentin's book, and it's through reading Meyasou's book that I became acquainted with the major philosopher who was going to play a major role, or actually two philosophers in my own writing and thinking, Deleuze, who I'm sure you're familiar with, especially the tradition of thinking about the possible and the real, the virtual and the real, you know that how Deleuze articulates that, the tradition of this that he gets from Bergson. So Henri Bergson was also key in my thinking. So I started reading Meyasou, then Deleuze, then Bergson, so going backward in order to make my whole upbringing. Okay. So this takes me to the two strands that we said we're going to cover today about speculation, financial and metaphysical. If you open the dictionary, and actually I searched that on the web this morning, to search for the word speculation, you read, first of all, to engage in any business transaction involving considerable risk in the expectation of a quick or very large profit. Of course, this is financial speculation. And the fact that you are expecting a quick or very large profit is something suspicious. So it's supposed to be a bad thing because nobody is supposed to earn money quickly on a really large amount. So you already have a negative kind of consonants to the word. And the other, the dictionary definition, and this is the metaphysical one, is to speculate is to indulge in conjectural thought, meaning thought that is not really grounded in an empirical world, meaning thought that is literally metaphysical, meaning behind physics, because every physical world is what we observe. So here we are conjecturing about what we are not observing. And this is where, for instance, typically somebody can speculate about the major invisible thing, which is the future. So the future is something that is not physical and that is unknown. So you can also think about speculating about the future, and this is one of the first cases where the financial speculation and metaphysical speculation come together, because the future, of course, is the business of the financial markets. The future is the matter of the market, and according to me, and the future is the commodity. If I want to give you immediately the punchline of my whole talk, I would say that the future is the commodity that the financial derivatives at large are trading. So you see how I managed to play between the future that is unknown and completely metaphysical, which I make the commodity, meaning something material to which the derivatives market apply. And if you look into the etymological origin of the word speculation, it comes from a Latin word, I'm sure that you know it.
Speculum.
Yeah, which means to look.
Or it means mirror.
Yeah, it can mean a mirror. So it's to look not directly, to look in an indirect way. So it's even to watch over something, or even, I said, mirroring the world, or even spying on the world. So meaning to see things that you are not physically supposed to see, that you don't see spontaneously, that you kind of see in a distorted way, and to go to places where you're not supposed to go in thought. So to go back to thinking about the future, or to go back for speculative philosophers about thinking about God, or thinking about what really is behind nature, behind the laws of nature. So that area that should be forbidden to empirical thinking or to science, and we want to speculate about. This slide here is meant to, because I mentioned Bergson, to give you a little bit of chronology of speculation, to tell you that speculation goes a long way back. I came up with this chronology this morning. So I think it happened basically at the turn of the 20th century. So 1888 is the building of the Eiffel Tower. No, excuse my French angle on speculation. 1889, so a year later, Bergson writes his first, I think, metaphysical essay, which is an essay of the on the immediate data of consciousness. In 1891, Émile Zola writes Money, which is a novel, so maybe the fourth or fifth novel that he wrote. And I don't know if you're familiar with Zola. He was a naturalistic novelist, meaning he really wanted his novels to really investigate reality, the real. So he wrote about coal mining, he wrote about prostitution, he wrote about the real world, And in 1891, he had this project of writing about the stock exchange, because he was fascinated by that thing, which was at the same time very real and very much on the minds of everyone, not to mention speculative bubbles, yet very unreal. So he thought that only a novel would allow him to really investigate that thing. I will actually show you a couple of citations by the notebooks where he was preparing for his novel later. Then in 1896, Bergson again writes Matter and Memory, and that's important to me as a book, also very important for Miyasu, because Miyasu has written an article about contingency and probability, which draws a lot on Matter and Memory by Bergson. And here, because Bergson is a metaphysician, there is in that book, Matter and Memory, which is a very difficult book, also a kind of redefinition of what he means by matter and what he means by memory. So it's a speculative book in that sense. 1900, I did not know it until this morning, but it was fun to note it. Freud wrote Interpretations of Dreams. I mentioned it because it's also related to the unreal and what lies behind. And finally, the culmination of all this chronology, according through my eyes, is in 1900, Louis Bachelier, who is a French mathematician, wrote a book known as The Theory of Speculation, which I will discuss a little bit later. And the important thing to keep in mind, I'll tell it to you right away, is that in 1900, in that book, which is a book by a mathematician that Bachelier submitted at La Sorbonne as a PhD thesis with Poincaré, he already in that book got everything right as far as my industry, which is derivative trading, is concerned, derivative pricing is concerned. So it's really amazing to see that in 1900, in that book, you already have almost literally all the formulas that we are using in my field, except that the book was forgotten, and then Black and Scholes in 1973, I don't know if you are familiar with their names, proved the formula again. So they weren't aware, I believe, of Bachelier's work, so they showed the formula, which is not exactly the same as Bachelier, by other means which proved to be the right formula, because Bachelier was not really rigorous. And also Bachelier is known in that book to have introduced a key thing in finance and everywhere elsewhere also, even in physics, which is known as Brownian motion, which I will also discuss later. So, financial and metaphysical. So, basically my talk will oscillate between the two, and let's begin with the financial speculation. Let's do it. Okay, so first 3 extracts in French, but I will translate them, from Émile Zola's notebooks when he was in the course of preparing writing money, l'argent. And he says, the stock exchange in the middle of Paris, I want Zola to depict it as a mysterious and wide open cavern, where things happen that nobody understands. So it already gives you a good take on what financial speculation could mean. In correspondence with Maupassant, Maupassant at some point wrote to him by saying, I admit that in these words, financial transactions, speculation, there is a mystery which is impenetrable to my mind. That's Maupassant speaking here. And in the notebooks of Zola, at some point he wanted to talk about the main character of his book, of L'Argent, and he said, I want there to be a huge business transaction that only an audacious man would undertake, and it will make him, in the course of my novel, master of the stock exchange and of the financial market in only 2 years worth of time. I myself, this makes me think of Macron, because in 3 years he managed to become the master of something else. Okay. So that is the theory of speculation by Louis Bachelier that I mentioned. I'm not going to read that, but there are 2 things that I wanted to highlight. First of all, he says that there are countless factors that impact the stock exchange. Factors that may have nothing to do with the stock exchange as such, but they have impact. So that's the first paragraph. Second paragraph, he said, There might be natural reasons for the stocks to move, but there are also factitious reasons, which are reasons that have only to do with the stock exchange itself, so that there is a kind of feedback effect. So already there he had recognized this feedback effect, that what he called the marketplace will itself cause the price motion. And in any case, and this is the word that I have highlighted, he said that to determine these movements of the stock price requires an infinite number. I have highlighted the word infinity, because infinity is going to be, to me, to be a crucial word in the speculation. There's an infinity of factors that we cannot hope to model, and therefore I will resort. Nobody can predict the stock exchange, because at any point of time there is an infinity of causes and infinity of factors having impact on the price, and there are people faced to such an infinity of unreadable causes. That's what explains why at any moment you have exactly the half of the people, roughly, that who believe that the stock is going to go up, and the other half who believe that the stock is going to go down. So if you think about it for a minute, for us it means very natural today that the stock should be random, but for somebody like Bachelier, who was like writing the first book in that field, it was a little bit amazing that there should be no order but only randomness, and that people shouldn't agree on the value of things, but that half of them should be bearish and the other half bullish. This is what he says. And this is why he ends up concluding that only with probability, because of that randomness, shall we be able to produce formulas, which he does. And he distinguishes in the last paragraph, so that's the first chapter, he distinguishes two kinds of transactions that can be undertaken on the stock exchange. And the reason I talk about them is that because they are still there and very fundamental. What he calls les opérations fermes, meaning the physical transaction, where you go and buy the actual asset itself, like the bond or the equity or the share, and the derivatives, the opération à prime, meaning transaction that involve a premium. Okay, so here he distinguishes very well between buying the basic assets or the basic stock or the basic stuff that is being traded, or buying the derivatives product options. But the thing that interests me again here is that he said these two operations, the cash operations and the derivatives, can be combined infinitely. So because there is an infinite number of options, and there is also an infinity in the variety of combinations of these two transactions. Any questions?
You're going to tell us about what the derivatives are, right? Because, or maybe we should say that now, or you're going to say that now. Brilliant. Okay, good. Because we were at lunch, and it took him about 20 minutes to actually, convince him that I had understood. So let's see if it takes 2 minutes.
Okay. This is basically taken from Bachelier's book as well. So this diagram here is very, very familiar to anyone in my field. I mean, you find this diagram in any textbook today about derivatives, and it's already there in Bachelier's book. It's simple, the diagram. So what is this? This is typically the second transaction, or the second type of operations that you could do on a stock exchange that Bachelier was mentioning. This is the thing with the premium. So here, you want to buy a stock. So this upward sloping line is buying a stock, because this is gaining exposure to the stock upwards. So if you want to speculate on the price of the stock upwards, you would buy the stock, basically. It means, and this diagram means, that as the stock here appreciates, you gain appreciates. And you are buying a stock, the gain is dollar by dollar. I mean, if the stock goes up $1, you make $1. So it's a very basic thing. Any questions there? So that is buying a stock. However, call options start getting involved when you want to cancel the risk of losing money on the downside. Okay? So if you want to have a floor, if you don't want, as the stock goes down, to lose money, so you want your losses to be capped, to be floored rather, this is when you enter into something which is called a call option. Okay? And to do that, you have to pay a premium. Okay? So
Can you
instead-
make an example with something
Yeah.
real, like
So-
the elephants
okay,
that
so
we were talking about at lunch?
let's suppose that you want to buy a stock and the stock is trading at £100 today.
£100
So-
per 100 elephants.
No, £100 a stock, not elephants. This is finance.
Okay, well, try and make it more real
No,
because I
it's-
really have a hard time. Okay,
So you want to buy a stock
Yeah,
at the Google or something
okay,
now,
Google,
and you
okay.
call your broker, and the stock is trading at $100, which is here.
Okay.
It means that if you entered in that trade at that moment, if the stock appreciates above 100, you will make 100, and if it goes down, you lose money.
Okay.
Okay. So you accept to pay 100 plus $3 maybe. Okay.
Okay.
And that $3 that you pay is a premium that somebody else will sell to you, the seller of the call option, which then guarantees that your losses will be floored.
Okay.
Okay?
I got it. Did you? Cool. Okay, got it.
If you go to the
No,
exchange
it's
today,
clear. It's clear. So I'm really.
somebody tells you, don't pay the stock 100 if you bought it for 100 in the stock exchange and you gave me, so you have to pay to some other guy $3 extra. So buying the stock for you, you'll buy it as a total of 103. So that's what Bashiri was saying, was referring to as with a premium. So it will cost you 103. Okay. So if the stock
But yes,
goes,
let's risk. Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
So
Got it.
so you have $3 that you are not going to get back, all right? But the advantage of spending these extra $3, so if at the end of your investment period the stock closes at 102, you won't make any money because you are still, you paid 103. So it's only if the stock goes above 103 here, this is 100, this is 103, that you start to make money. That's what this diagram means. However, we are quite willing to spend the extra $3, which is called the premium of the call option, in order to guarantee that this loss, which is potentially you lose everything, you're not exposed to it anymore. So that's a call option. Okay?
Great.
Another way of saying the call option.
No, it's fine.
No, but it's
Okay.
important. So that is what happens if you went to this. We're talking about
Of
speculation.
course.
So this is what happens if you went to the stock exchange and wanted to buy the stock at the actual trading price and ask somebody to guarantee you against the losses to pay the extra $3. Okay. But there are other call options which are the out of the money call options, which I mentioned briefly, which is a strange creature because even though the stock is trading at 100, you might be interested that somebody sells to you a call option which gives you the right to buy the stock at 120. Okay? So you wonder, if the stock is trading at 100, why should I be interested in buying it at 120, which is more expensive? The only interest that you might have in that could be speculation, because that premium, the right to buy the stock at 120 is almost worthless today because the stuff is trading at 100. So what's the point in buying it at 120? So if you went to somebody and told him, at what price would you sell me the right to buy that stock at 120, he almost tempted to sell you for nothing because it's worthless. Yet he will sell it to you with a small premium. Why? Because you never know, maybe at the end of the year the stock will be trading at 200. So in that case, having put in your pocket the right to buy it at 120 would be very valuable. So you see how with options you can be speculative, and this is a very known effect because you will be buying that call for a very small premium because it's virtually worthless. But if at the end of the year, say, the stock is trading at 200, you may have paid 10 cents for that option, but it will be worth $80. So these are called out of the money options, and they are very popular among speculators in that sense because you only pay a small amount of money, which you will lose if nothing happens, but it's small, but potentially your gains can be 100 folds if the stock goes up. And this is the reason Why derivatives? Because of that multiplicative effect that you can have on your investment. Why derivatives people are scared about them? Because if you bought that option, apparently somebody must have sold it to you. So that guy who sold you the premium for 10 cents, he is potentially liable to lose the $80 that the option will be worth when the stock goes to 200. So that's why there's this leverage effect, which potentially is very terrifying in options. Okay? No?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so continuing now with Bachelier. If you read the book of Bachelier, because I was reading it yesterday to prepare this talk, and I said, okay, it's called The Theory of Speculation, but where is the first time in the book that the word speculation occurs? It actually occurs 10 pages into the book. And he says one deals with the downward premiums only when speculating on the goods. So let me explain that. This is also important to set up the reason why speculation is seen as a bad thing. I showed you earlier the diagram where you were basically speculating on the stocks going up. So that's called the call option. But also there exists a derivative which is exactly symmetrical, meaning it speculates on the stock going down, which is called the put option. Okay? So that's also a put option that you can buy for a small premium, and you'll make loads of money if the stock collapses. And this is what Bachelier calls the downward premiums, meaning it's speculating downwards. And it's here that he is using for the first time the bad word speculation. And this is the reason why put options were banned actually in 1929 after the first crash, because these were bad derivatives in the sense that people would buy them to speculate against the well-being of companies. So you buy them for a few cents and you make millions if the stock collapses or if the economy collapses. So of course you're happy, but for some people it was completely immoral that somebody would make millions against the well-being of the companies. Okay? And the last occurrence of the word speculation in the second occurrence is when he says, and this is rather a technical statement, he says the mathematical expectation of the speculator is equal to 0. So this means that anyone who is speculating in the stock exchange or playing in the casino from a speculation point of view, meaning not the good point of view of investing, from the gambling point of view, according to the calculations of Bachelier, because it's total randomness, he will, in the long run, makes no money at all. That's what it means by mathematical expectation, is what's the expected gain on the long term of that individual. So it is zero. Okay, so it's fair enough, right? Okay. So let us now move to some images. Because everyone seems okay. So I told you that in Bachelier's book, written in 1900, you already have everything that makes sense and that's very hot in my business today. And first of all, Bachelier, what he came up with was how to compute probabilities in the stock exchange when the market price of the stock followed this very weird process as time unfolds, which Bachelier, I don't believe that he called it Brownian motion, but this is exactly what he had in mind, meaning that at no point in time, if you magnify the picture, could you predict what's the next movement of the stock is going to be. Okay? This is a very interesting mathematical construct here, Brownian motion. So it's a bit non-intuitive, and it's worthwhile that I spend a few seconds explaining to you, because this is really at the basis of everything that we do in mathematical finance, and as I said, Bachelier had already discovered it. It's the fact that, remember that at any moment he said there was an infinity of conflicting causes impacting the stock, an infinity of causes which will happen not at the same time but continuously in time. So one cause, then the other one, a millisecond later, etc. And because of that, you end up with something which is very non-intuitive, mathematically or even philosophically speaking, something which is random but is continuous. When you think about randomness, you think about flipping a coin. So you flip a coin, it's heads or tails. So between one throw of the coin and the other, there is an interval of time. Or when you throw a die, you wait before you throw the other die. So it's discrete. Whereas here, Bachelier, without actually knowing, without providing yet the rigorous mathematics, he invented for the first time the notion of randomness, which is continuous in time. In other words, if you magnified that picture, the more you magnified it, at no scale that you look at it, by magnifying it, will it become predictable. At no scale will it become smooth. So if the price trajectory becomes smooth, if you enhance the picture, it's smooth means you can predict. Because if it's smooth, it means that the stock is going up, and then you can predict, and you can speculate and make money. But here we are saying that at no scale that you magnified it, it will always look jagged and random. So that's a very non-intuitive notion, which was only mathematically proved and constructed in the 1930s. And it is at the basis of all financial mathematics. And this is what today, by the way, justifies high-frequency trading. Because high-frequency trading, you have algorithms that are supposed, to make bets on whether the stock is going to go up and down. So these are algorithms that are based on statistics. Therefore, these are algorithms which account for randomness. Yet they are trading in finer and finer timescales, because you are trading in the millisecond and perhaps even lower. So that means that really randomness, no matter what the scale that you look at, you have randomness at any scale. Okay, so that's already in Bachelier, and that referred to the first instance of the word infinite that I highlighted, because I said there was an infinity of causes impacting the stock. The other occurrence of the word infinity that I had highlighted were the infinity of combinations of calls and puts, what he called transactions premiums, that you could buy on the stock exchange. So here what I'm showing you, and Bachelier was writing that in 1900, what I'm showing you here is as of May 2014, something produced by the software that we developed in my company, which is an instant snapshot of all the combinations that Bachelier was mentioning. So what is this here? This is the market as seen that minute on May 5, 2014, of all the options that are trading at that instant on the Euro stocks, which is the European Equity Index. Okay? So the picture that I showed you earlier, the brown in motion, let's imagine that it is the motion in time of the equity index. It could be the S&P, for instance, also. Whereas here what I'm showing you is a snapshot. So this picture is not in time, it's a snapshot, instantaneous picture of, at that very second, the 1,200 or so options of different maturities and different strike prices that are trading instantly on the Euro stocks. Okay.
What does vanillas mean?
Good question. That's called a vanilla option. So the two brands of what in my business we call vanilla options are call options, which allow you to take a bullish position, as we say, on the stock and not incur losses if the stock goes down. And the other one that I mentioned is a put option, which is symmetrical. So the put option would allow you to make money if the stock collapses, and you don't make money if the stock goes up. So these two brands of options, calls and puts, are what we call vanilla options, as opposed to exotic options, which are options.
You're kidding.
No.
Wow. Okay.
Which I will show you next in the picture.
Please.
So what could be an exotic option? So here, okay, everyone understood how this works. So the stock is like fluctuating randomly, and eventually it will go up at the maturity of the option, because the option has a maturity. You buy an option and you wait during the lifetime of the option. So options may have maturities of 1 day, so they would expire tomorrow, or 1 week, or 1 month, or 3 months, or 2 years, etc. So you have different maturities and different strike prices. This is the strike price. Remember when I told you that you bought at 100 or 120, etc. Okay. So the stock is moving randomly, as I showed you on the graph. So I'm interested at the maturity of the option. So when the option is going to expire, you look at the outcome, see where the stock is. If the stock happens to have settled at the maturity of the option above the strike price, in such amounts of money that you are back to the premium, you will make money. Okay. And for the put, it's the other one, if the stock settles behind. Now, exotic options is adding features to what we call the payout of the option. So for instance, adding as a condition, imagine that as the stock fluctuates, that it's going and is going a year from now to end up way above the strike price. If in the meantime the stock has hit a certain level which is below, then the call option is knocked out. In that case, it's called the barrier option. Okay, so that's it. The option dies. So you have conditions like that you can add on the vanilla options to make them exotic. So adding complexities, or
wow. Sorry, I mean.
So that's
like
exotic option.
adding complexity. That's
Yes.
like wow.
Or the other dimension.
Quite something. Okay.
So to go back to this. So this is, if you can see here, the 2 dimension. I have several curves here. The first one are the prices of options which will expire in 11 days from now. So 11 days after May 5. And the last one is options that will expire 4.6 years after that present day. And these are options that are standardly trading on the stock exchange every second. And the other dimension here, keeping in mind that the actual spot price of the equity is 3,172, this dimension here is the strike price of the option, the price at which you have the right to buy the stock later or the right to sell the stock. That's the other dimension. So these 2 dimensions create that table where you have 1,200 options which are underlain by the same underlying, which is the Euro stocks. But the important thing to keep in mind is that this infinity of stuff potentially is trading instantly. So instantly you have all those quotes. Okay.
Okay, just one thing. We're ultra late, just beyond late.
Oh.
So yeah, so
No, we're good. So
no, I mean, I want to hear the whole thing. So
Yeah.
of course, don't feel, obliged to stay if you guys have to go. But let's try to be a little bit more.
Okay, so I will need 15 minutes to cover the metaphysical speculation.
No, I think
Can
it would
I
be
ask a question
interesting,
on
but
that?
yeah.
So for you, is that a diagram of that also shows randomness? Because that looks way more like a pattern than the previous one.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go into the workings of that thing, it's exactly, yes, in reverse that we use that. These, from the prices of options which are observed instantaneously, that's the interesting thing. Whereas the first graph showed you what our speculation about the future of the evolution of the stock could be. That in that case you have instantly all those prices, so that are materially here, that if you run them into a software like we are developing, will give us information about the statistics of the underlying.
So it's like a 3D snapshot of a moment.
So it's a 3D snapshot of the moment, but the interesting thing is that it gives us ideas about the randomness of in the future of the stock. That's the interesting thing. So derivatives, remember I told you, in derivatives, the future becomes material. It's no longer future that I'm speculating about and I have no idea what it is, but it's as if the derivatives here were, from that snapshot as of today, already giving me information about the future randomness.
As if.
Yes.
But the as if is the important.
Yes, exactly. Because the next day, the future will be different the next day anyway. But it's important to logically have in mind that people who think about finance and speculation. And let me spend 30 seconds.
No, but let's just, wait. Hold on a second. Let's
Yeah.
agree that because we started at 6:10, if you all agree, I don't know, I hope you do.
What time
Maybe
do
we
you
can
want to start?
finish like at 7:30. So I think you will be able to finish this and then also go into the metaphysical part.
Yeah, sure, no.
Yeah?
It can be
Do
done
it
at
as
7.
if you were going to finish.
If that works out for most of us, because I think we should. Okay, great.
I mean,
Yeah, sorry, carry on.
No, but I mean, people who, because the keyword for dummies,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
People who think about speculation in terms of algorithmic trading and high frequency trading, etc. Of course, I mean, you've all heard about that. And even people in my field who think about what the market means, they all have in mind this picture, which is the picture of algorithmic trading, frequency trading, meaning what is our speculation that the stock will do next day, next year, etc. And it's completely unpredictable. And this is how you build algorithms that learn from statistics. Even they can learn from very short-term statistics in order to predict the next tick. So that is the algorithmic point of view that everyone thinks that the market is all about. And I say that's completely wrong because it's only negligible in comparison to the other picture that people are not familiar with. And only, I'm sorry to say, only people who know derivatives and are trading derivatives know, which is where instantly you don't have the price of a single asset, which is the Euro stocks, but you have instantly 1,200 prices of the option written on them. And by far, if you have a tool that allows you to read from the prices of those 1,200 options information, it gives you a much finer and richer predictions that the market thinks about the behavior of the stock than the algorithmic view that people develop in algorithmic trading.
So
That's my point.
software reading the diagram.
Sorry?
Is your software reading the diagram?
Yeah, my software, how the software,
So your software's reading the codes and the puts
Yes, yes.
to say this is what's happening in the market effectively, rather than relying on outside factors.
yeah, rather than rely on the past. Because
You're
algorithmic
like,
trading,
So what's different from the predictive algorithm that learns from
Yeah,
its behavior?
yeah, this is very important. The whole thing is about learning from the past or the future, if I may speak metaphorically. Trading algorithms and statistical trading and statistical arbitrage and high frequency trading are more or less statistical algorithms that try to predict from the past. So they are trained on the last sequence of prices that they have observed, even very short term, and they can be very clever in terms of reprogramming themselves and reacting. So that, of course, they can be reprogrammable and they do that automatically, but they are basically drawing all their inferences from patterns that they recognize in the history of the prices that are behind them. Whereas in my philosophy and whole thing, that's completely wrong because nobody can predict the future based on the past. I mean, if you're not familiar with Nassim Taleb's Black Swan and all that, the major thing that we are saying here and also relating to Meyasu is that the event, there is no way to predict what's ahead of us from the past. But for some reason, because here people think that there's such a huge amount of data, meaning the statistical series of prices, they think that the algorithm can recognize patterns. Whereas the very fact that there exists such a thing as a derivatives market is actually an argument that goes directly against learning from the past. Because the derivatives, as I said, the maturities are in the future. So if you have, yes?
So what is the point of predicting 4 and 6 years into the future? Is that right? 4 to 6 years?
Yes?
Why go that far ahead if it's kind of not important?
Because I mean, people have investments in the market and they have bought stuff on the long term. So it so happens that the general interest that in the market generates business on options maturing in 5 years.
So the people who purchase and they request the longer term options. based
Yeah,
on that.
yes. And it has become, I mean, now the markets are very liquid. So, I mean, you don't know why this exists. It has been standardized like this in Chicago on exchanges. You have a standard kind of tables of options, and the longer maturities here on the Euro stocks are 5 years. On the S&P, you can go as far as 10 years, I believe, also.
Is there any brokerages as well that can sell options?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
But options, in the end, are down to market makers who are showing those prices. But anyway, the point that I'm trying to make, which is important, is that if an algorithm could learn from the history of prices of the stock, recognize pattern, and then predict things, there would be no need to have an options market. Why? Because the options are predicated on the future, because the option is basically you are buying premiums and selling premiums as bets as what will unfold in the future. Okay? So for instance, one very interesting case is to ask whether the guy who is running a trading algorithm based on the past, will he be able to predict the prices of the options correctly? Turns out no, because he never took the option prices as an input in his machine. And I'm sure that he is completely wrong. In other words, that guy, even though he can make money locally, the massive market that we have on the derivatives, you're here as a proof that he is wrong, because the market itself has invented its own means of, I won't say predict because it's not prediction, its own means of giving me information about the future, which is exactly the derivatives market. But where it becomes mind-boggling is that the next day the prices of derivatives are going to change. So it's as if the next day the future changes. So every day the future is different, which adds another layer of contingency on top of that. So I, for instance, who is really involved in that field, I wonder how, when you have all this in mind, can you ever imagine that a trading algorithm that you are training on the history, and the past history, could ever predict anything? On the contrary, the existence of derivatives is the direct proof that it's not even computable and feasible to do.
Élie, I'm not sure whether you're getting there in a second, but would it be the right moment to just explain in one sentence what the derivatives are? Because, like, the difference between derivatives and options, I don't know if it's coming up, I don't remember. But just, you know, the difference between these different terms, really, because derivatives and options, I'm not sure about the difference. I don't know if you guys know, but I find it confusing. Do you know? Oh, I don't know what derivatives is, but she's suggesting to move on, so let's move on.
No, I mean, call option is one case of a derivative.
Okay, fine.
Okay. Vanilla options are the first one of cases.
And exotic are the other
Exotics are the derivatives, and
okay, sorry, I'm the dumb one. Okay, fine.
So here is another view of the calls and puts. It's the same shape that I'm just looking from the other side to show you the shorter terms one, the longer term one. Same view. Calls and puts trading on the Euro stocks. And the next slide is another derivative, which is options written on the volatility index. Okay, I won't try to explain, but these are derivatives, exotic options. And what are they really? These are options written on the options. Remember when I said there is an infinity in how you can combine things. So I showed you, first infinity, I showed you that you can infinitely have as many options as you have maturities and as you have strike prices. But there's another dimension of infinity where as soon as options like that become traded every second in the markets, you have 1,200 options which are trading liquidly in the market. So as if each one of those options became itself a basic asset. In that case, you can in turn write a derivative or an option on it. So you have that other layer where you have options written on options, and it's not for fun that we do that. I mean, you need that because it turns out that the volatility index, I don't know if it's called the fear index also, is also something which measures the volatility of the market, is also something which has become tradable in exchanges as it is. So people trade volatility, and on it you trade options, which I'm showing you here. So these are options written on the volatility index, and the volatility index itself is made up of options, of vanilla options. So you have another layer.
So you're trading the volatility of volatility.
Exactly. So you have volatility products, which are the vanilla options, and you have volatility of volatility products. The reason why I'm spending time doing all this, because this is telling you really where the matter of the market and the sheer massivity of the market lies, and to tell you how far we are from the very naive view of trying to predict only the motion of a single asset, which, by the way, is the first one, which is like the index itself. So as soon as you capture in mind the sheer number of layers of options, it becomes almost a mathematical proof that I can show you that no algorithm will ever succeed. And you ask me, so what's the alternative? The alternative is no algorithm, but the market itself. The market itself of derivatives becomes the prediction algorithm of the future, except that I don't want to call it a prediction, because to me prediction is in the frame of probability and all that. So prediction, I reserve that to the trading algorithms. So this is something else. The fact that you have a market of options where instantly you have all this wealth of pricing of options, this is what is leading me to the overturning of the metaphysics of probability and prediction into looking into something else, which is material, because it's happening now. All those prices are instant prices. They are not prices that we are imagining in the future.
Just before you move on, so each one of those prices, though, even no matter how, whether it's a price of an estimation of volatility or volatility, they all still have a Brownian motion thing going on where each one of those prices could go up or down.
Absolutely.
At any moment as
Absolutely.
well.
But the important thing is that those prices are actual prices that are traded today.
Yeah.
So it's like a measurement.
Yeah. So, but each one of those prices will, as the day unfolds, will also fluctuate, etc., etc. So volatility itself becomes volatile, and there is no end to it.
Because otherwise there'd be no market.
Exactly. That's exactly the key point. Because if at some stage, imagine that three levels above, that's it. The option on the option on the options becomes completely fixed and no longer trades. That will be like the fourth level of volatility, which is fixed. But to me, it will be the end of the market, because there is no reason why the derivatives that you wrote on the fourth level, meaning derivatives measuring the volatility, there's no reason why those derivatives shouldn't trade in their market in turn and therefore be volatile themselves. Because by definition, a market is something that is volatile as soon as it's open to the free exchange. So that's exactly, you've framed it exactly, that's exactly the heart of my argument. If you admit that markets exist and there is no limitation to the levels upon which I can write derivatives on derivatives, that immediately is contradictory to any kind of algorithm, no matter how complex it is. Because any levels of derivatives, as you said, has to trade. Okay.
And to summarise that is a piece that we published. A simple way of kind of contracting all that is to say a market that is predictable is not a market.
Of course.
A market by its very nature is unpredictable.
Yeah.
End story.
Yeah. However, I mean, we can spend time on this, don't worry, because that's important.
I'm not worried at all.
Okay.
I can stay here all night.
Of course. I mean, I can end here.
No.
You're right. The market is not predictable. Fine. So that's Brownian motion, because nobody can predict Brownian motion. However, then people come and measure Brownian motion and tell you that the volatility of Brownian motion is 20%. So it becomes predictable at the other level. Okay. But as soon as you have options trading, even the volatility of Brownian motion itself becomes unpredictable. So therefore, it generates a market for volatility on volatility, etc. So it's not enough to say that something is in itself unpredictable, because a statistician looking at it, or somebody who is programming a trading algorithm, can tell you, well, it is unpredictable, fine, meaning I cannot predict whether it will go up or down, but I can predict the statistics of it. I know that volatility is 20%, and I can start making money when volatility deviates from 20%, for instance. But here you come and say, no, because there exist options markets and volatility, it's not, there is no level of predictability.
So there's no complexity either.
What do you mean complexity?
Well, you kind of apply complexity theory to this, where you would begin to subject that to a kind of mathematics, where you'd be able to estimate certain kinds of behavior.
Well, I mean, of course, there are a lot of people who do very clever maths trying to have like even strange attractors and stuff like that. But those people, I mean, it's also a very flourishing industry. Those I categorize also in the trading algorithms kind of area. here my point is the only thing that I believe in is the market, and because you have a market for derivatives, to me that's the line of thinking that tells me that there is no algorithm based on prediction that will ever work.
How do you know the percentage of volatility?
How?
How do you know the percentage of volatility?
Well, people who are doing statistical analysis will measure statistically the volatility and tell you that over the last 10 days the volatility of the stock is 10% and it will continue, and they predict on that.
So from the past?
From the past, but that's the wrong view. In my view here, the volatility are implied from the option prices. So it's looking forward. So the market is trading options here at certain levels, and from those levels I can compute in my software by doing some complex math the volatility and the volatility of volatility that the market is itself implying from the prices of options. But the main thing is that it's looking forward because my only input are premiums of options which are written in the future and not looking at the history of prices of the underlying.
So is the market God? Is that what you...
Yes, that's exactly what we are driving at. This is what takes us back to the absolute and to speculation and the metaphysical things. At least it's God as far as the market is concerned, of course. I'm not saying that the market is going to tell me what to do with my family. Okay, so maybe we move now because we've covered all that.
Yeah,
we can
we
move
covered
to the metaphysical.
Sure. Yeah.
How much time? 10 minutes?
I don't know, what's the time?
7, 10?
Yeah, we said 7:30 now as
Oh,
the final call.
So as soon as you calculate something, it's already in the past. You're taking a snapshot, not
Yeah.
into the future.
Yeah.
It's immediately over.
Exactly. What we call, I mean, the way we refer to it, because we have like a machine that takes all these inputs of data, calculate the volatility coefficients. What we call it is, we call it calibrate. We calibrate our model to the 1200 prices. So we got something that is read from not the past, but from the present, but it will become past in the next second. And what we say is that then we detonate the model and we move to the next second and we have to start all over again. So the next second, like you've seen the movie Die, Live, Die, Repeat, etc. In the next second, everything starts again. I have no memory virtually of the past, but I still have 1200 prices of options and I can restart again. And you ask me, how do you make money now? Because there are no memory between the past and the future. The only way I can make money from my point of view is being a market maker, yourself producing those option prices. So you make money by buying and selling to other people. That's the only way to make money consistently. If you believe me that there is no way you can predict anything, is to be actually yourself the maker of the market.
So in a way you're like constantly like making rules of what happens.
Not making rules, I'm always inferring rules from the rest of the world that I'm observing, which are the prices of derivatives, to the rules that I'm inferring only will allow me to give prices of other options that people will want to buy or sell from me. Like for instance, price exotic options or price other stuff that wasn't in the market that I have observed. I do that, I earn a little bit of money because I sell them at the margin, and then the next second I'm completely empty-headed again. I have to restart my machine in order to find the new rules for the next second. That to me is the only way to make money in the market. It's meaning to be in the market. According to me, no one can make money in the market by being outside, by being like a hedge fund manager trying to take bets on the market. You may make money for 5 years and lose everything the 6th year. This is what the Black Swan or Nassim Taleb is arguing.
Yeah, I'm the hiding problem.
Okay. So let's not hide from it. If you are looking at something which is as massively random as this, which is fair enough, because we are looking at something which is supposed to be at least as random as the future. Remember, I told you the future is my method. So the future is so massively random that nobody can predict it. And the market is something that is looking at the future as far as the market is concerned. So it makes sense that you could not make money in the market, or you make money for 5 years and lose everything the 6 years, and that the only way that you can predict the market is not predicted, is being in the market, flying with the market at the same speed. So being a market maker. So maybe it's bad news because I'm saying that the only way to be consistent is to be making the market, and you cannot not have a market because the economy needs the market, because the economy needs derivatives that are written on the future. And of course it will induce a lot of people to try to program algorithms and try to sell you the idea that their algorithms will make money, or to create hedge funds to sell the idea that they will make money. Fine, I mean that's the industry. But if you went to the bottom of the argument, Nassim Taleb already says, oh, no, there is no way anyone can predict the event with capital E, therefore eventually the hedge funds will lose everything in 6 years. And I go even further than Nassim Taleb by saying, well, the market is not the problem. The market is already the answer if you look at derivatives, because derivatives by themselves already show exactly the fact that no algorithm can succeed. And again, not everyone knows that, because this is already complex. Already now we spent an hour trying to explain to you what are derivatives, etc. But keep in mind that they are simple in the sense that as soon as anything trades and is fluctuating with some volatility, you write a derivative on it, which may be very complex, but the derivative, as soon as it becomes traded itself, can become a basic asset to another derivative. So it's a simple argument, not a complex one. The argument for the infinity.
Sorry, can I ask you a last question on this? But in a way, like in a very maybe simple, superficial, non-expert way, you could also argue that yes, you are always in the middle of the event. Yeah. You just look at what exactly is in front of you with no recollection of the past. But if you were to do the same thing with some recollection and memory of the past as a statistical kind of bag,
yes,
wouldn't that help? I mean, wouldn't that just help instead of like not help?
I mean,
if you see what I'm saying.
Not if you are a market maker like I used to be, where every second you have to answer a different person. The only memory that you have in that case is something more human, meaning I remember that this guy who is coming today to ask me to buy these options, I remember that he sold them a week ago. So I think chances are that he wants to buy them back. So I have a memory of what socially is happening there,
right?
Humanly happening there. Yes, I have a memory. So it's not like I'm not a machine.
No, of course. But I'm now talking about the machine. Sorry, I'm talking about you, but I'm talking about the machine. So like a machine that, like the algorithm that, we all know about, whatever. Like is there, but in combination with like your machine that just looks at, I don't know, like kind of in an intuitive way. It's like, well, of course, the more knowledge you have, the better, kind of thing.
No, but
whereas
knowledge.
Okay.
It's a temptation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it sounds great.
You think it could be knowledge, but eventually, even though it's more than temptation, people try even to guess. Even volatility. You can say, well, I'll look in the past and see what happens. But as soon as you do that, you are doomed to fail at some point.
Would you say it's accurate to call that then essentially a superstition or something? If you kind of, I'm thinking it's very, what you're describing is quite similar to the way that, say, in the Middle Ages, people would trade upon the idea that you can buy your way into a better afterlife, even though the theology included the idea of that God was ineffable, so obviously they couldn't. And it was that kind of, I don't know, it seems very much like essentially a superstition that people like trading in. That you're just hoping you can have some control over something that you know is necessarily completely random.
Of course, you have people who are not market makers who are trading on the market because they have views on the market.
Right. Okay.
Of course, I mean, otherwise, if everyone was a market maker, there would be no end user of the market, and also the market would collapse. I'm only describing the point of view of the market maker who is empty-headed, as I said, every day in the morning. But obviously, people come to the market like investors or fund managers who have ideas and views, who are betting that Macron will be elected president or Marine Le Pen, and taking views, of course, about the real future and the real economy. But these are long-term views, or views that have to do with something which has to do with history. So of course, and maybe superstitious, maybe they want to buy, they can have all kinds of reasons. However, those to me, looking through their eyes, is not the correct way, according to me, to look at the market. If I want to define ontologically, metaphysically, what the market is, I have I prefer to define it through the eyes of the market maker. So through the eyes of somebody who is empty-headed, has no presuppositions and no forecast, as it is only reacting to the prices. And the way I can do that, because you tell me if you are empty-headed and you have nothing to say and no story to tell, how can you make up for all those stories that the other people have in mind, etc.? I can make up with the wealth of derivative prices that I'm addressing and that the other people are not seeing with the broad scope that I'm seeing. Because I'm a market maker and the tools that we have developed, we can take into account all derivatives written on the S&P and crunch those numbers and instantly produce what the market thinks that the vol is going to be, etc., for the next second until we do it again. So that's the choice of the technology that we have. So in no instance in our technology will we look at the past. So we always take snapshots of prices of derivatives at the present moment. However, we require that we take in as many prices as we can. So if I have 1,200 prices of vanilla options, I will want to take on top of those the options on the options that I showed you on the third slide. Mm-hmm. The more I get info on derivatives that are different from each other, the more I can make up for not looking in the past and try to get a feeling of the richness of the future purely from the present, which is the present prices of options. That's the move that I'm trying to still work on metaphysically, and not to this date. I don't think that any philosopher of probability or any philosopher of the event that I have learned, I read about, has considered this aspect of the derivatives market. And this is why I've written the two books, obviously, is to try to put that in contrast or in confrontation with with people who look at the foundation of probability or statistics. So this is new. No one philosophically has yet thought thoroughly about what it means that derivatives should trade liquidly, because that's the case today. I mean, in 100 years, Bachelier, there were only call options, but today we have liquid options trading, and especially the layering that I showed you is also quite new. Options written on options. This is a new thing. And this to me is challenging and can take me into and this is the transition to the metaphysical thing, to rethinking in a new way, the foundations of probability of statistics, because as I said, probability and statistics do not apply, because at any level of statistical model that you have, if you stop there, no matter how complex, the layer of derivatives that is written out of it, when those derivatives will trade, will contradict the previous layer. That's my postulate, if you will. So this kind of thinking, where no matter how complex you make a certain scenarios or you make statistics, no matter how complex, it will be contradicted by something which is the trading of derivatives of the next level. This is something that people thinking on probability and the metaphysics of probability have not yet perfectly taken into account. And to me, it is important.
Those of you who have to go, don't feel trapped. Now it's the moment to get out. So if you're staying, you're staying. Ready? Okay,
actually,
fine. Everyone's staying.
I'll cover 3 slides.
I said it.
Okay. So let's take breathe a little bit. So forget for one moment about finance. I'll do the link later, and let's talk about metaphysical speculation. Francesca, sir, shall I wait for you? Or?
No, go. No, don't worry, I hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so metaphysical speculation, as I said earlier, started when philosophers needed to speculate about what was lying behind the empirical world and behind the empirical facts. So Hume is famous for posing what is known as Hume's problem, as saying, I have no guarantee that the laws of nature will still apply the next day. And it's true, because the physical laws of nature, they are not mathematical facts. It's not that you've shown them by logic and the next day mathematical logic will still be valid. It's true that nothing stops God or the world from deciding the next day that all of a sudden the gravity law as we know it no longer applies. And so that's Hume's problem, is that how can I infer from a certain physical law, how can I infer the necessity of persistence of the law? That's the major problem. This is how you go from physics to metaphysics. So I not only need to write the physical law, I need to be sure that the blackboard on which I'm writing this law is there to stay and the law is not going to change. So Hume posed that problem, and he ended up concluding that there is no way that by reasoning alone we can show that the laws of nature will hold by necessity. And he ended up concluding that the laws of nature, we believe that the sun is going to rise tomorrow only because we are accustomed to that fact. So it's only habit that makes me believe in something as the necessity of the remaining of the law of nature. So Hume is an empirical philosopher, as you know, but you can call him speculative because he was like trying to give a negative answer to the speculative kinds of attempts. Leibniz is probably the most famous of speculative philosophers because he, for one, wanted to believe that no, the world is not contingent, and it's not the case that the laws of nature for no reason are going to collapse the next day. But because he was challenged, to show that, so he resorted to, he was known for the principle of sufficient reason, meaning there is nothing that happens without a reason to produce it, because he did not want to believe in pure contingency. And where he becomes speculative is by saying, well, because the world we live in is the world as we see it, but I want to show, in other words, that there are some necessity that makes the laws of nature stick in it. So he kind of imagined what other possible worlds there can be where the laws of nature would be different, and maybe if the rules of nature go wild in the other world, then maybe human beings will die or something like that. So Leibniz was the first one, in my quick rereading of the history of the thing, to invent the notion of possible worlds. So as opposed to the actual world we live in, the very first idea, and this is where speculations come into place, that I imagine a different world than the one I live in, which is almost similar to the one I'm in, but different with a few respects, which is called the possible worlds. And he then argued that a thing is contingent if that thing, which we know in our actual world, may not be in place in the other possible worlds. So if you have an object which is red in our world but turns out to be green in the other possible world, it means that it's not necessarily green, it's contingently green. So that's the definition in this kind of logical thinking of necessity and contingency. So something is necessary if in all possible worlds that you can think about, it will be red in all those possible worlds. Something is necessary if in all those possible worlds that thing exists. And if you found in your thinking a case of a possible world where that thing doesn't exist, it means that that thing is not necessary, it becomes contingent. Then somehow Leibniz, once he had thought about all those possible variations of the actual world, he then invoked the fact that for sure God, who knows everything and knows not only our world but all kinds of variations of our world, so God who knows all this range of possible worlds, no doubt that God has run a certain optimizing algorithm, if you will, and came up with the best of all possible worlds, because God is infinitely good and infinitely knowledgeable. So that was Leibniz's way of arguing, because God knows everything, and of course he has chosen of all those possible worlds, the actual world that we live in, because he is infinitely good, and because to be in a good world, it means that the laws of nature have to hold. So that was Leibniz's way of arguing that the laws of nature will hold. Okay. So, of course, this already gives you hints about the two philosophers that I will discuss and will end up with. First of all, Meillassoux I've already mentioned, because Meillassoux, of course, will try to argue on the contrary that nothing is necessary and everything is contingent. But before we go there is Kant, who kind of completely changed the problem and said speculation itself is useless. So there is no end to the degree of innovations that philosophers can think about, like Leibniz, to speculate about what is not known. So I don't want, Kant says, to inquire about how the world is as seen from God's point of view and how the things are in themselves, and I don't want to inquire into the conditions that guarantee the necessity of the laws of nature or whatnot. That it might be the case that these questions exist. However, I don't want to ask those questions. They are not interesting questions. What is interesting, according to Kant, is to argue why science is possible at all. So Kant is more of a philosopher of science, I think, according to me, than a speculative philosopher. Philosopher of science, because Kant was, of course, very much impressed by Newton and by the physics that Newton has shown. And this is why Kant says, by far, what is most interesting is not the conditions that tell me whether the laws of nature are necessary or not, but the conditions that must necessarily obtain in order that we can have something as a science, as consistent as a science. So Kant is famous for saying that the conditions of possibility of experience, so the fact that experience consistently is possible and experimenting with things is possible and experimenting in science is possible, so the conditions of possibility of experience as human, as in science, gives me the conditions of possibility of the object of experience. So, in other words, he wanted to write the logic of science rather than talk about the things in themselves. So, Kant says that what's important in science is that I have the logic whereby I have something which is a thing in itself, but that I cannot inspect. The only thing that science can be is take that thing and turn it into an object which has properties. So science becomes the subject that is looking at that object. So the logic of subject and object, looking at an object, etc., is what makes science possible. This is not to say that the world exists only in the minds of people, because Kant has been interpreted as saying, well, it's the subjectivity of the human mind that is the cement of the universe and makes the universe hold together. No, because you can completely run, according to me and people who have read the philosophy of Kant, independently of the existence of the human subject, simply by thinking about what science means. Science in itself exists. I mean, aliens could invent science as well. And even if nobody invents science, you could think that somehow in the books of gods or in the books of a human being to be, something like science exists. Science which is complete with the formalism of scientific theories that is mathematical as we know, and also with the protocol of experience to which I submit the scientific theory in order to validate them or not. So that thing which is the logic of science, you can imagine that it exists, written in the books of the world, independently of the human subject. But you tell me, okay, if human beings were never born, that no one would have come up with the actual formula of Einstein or Newton, and no one would have done the experimental, the physical experiments in the laboratory, etc. I agree with you, but that's the important point. That's not a reason to say that therefore science and the world is in the mind of human beings. So it's as if somebody was just articulating the logic of what it means to have a formal theory and what it means to have the interpretation of that theory. If you want to interpret in a certain formalism what the symbols in the formalism mean, the guy who is interpreting this need not be a human being. But strangely enough, it's a power that is not contained in the formalism. The formalism cannot interpret itself, so you have to rise from syntax to the level of semantics. So you have to have the two levels. Yet it's not necessarily the case that the other level is a subject. That's the difficulty here.
So it's like this, and I think this is what Menasu says as well. That if like the base argument would be that before there was a human brain,
yes,
that was capable of thinking of conditions for existence didn't exist before that moment. which sounds paradoxical.
So that's what Meillassoux wants to criticize
Yes.
in Kant.
Yeah. So
But-
if you suppose existence
Yeah.
in the sense that we think about it existed before the first person of the brain to conceptualize it. I can't finish the rest of that sentence.
Yeah, but however, I mean, of course, Meillassoux is very penetrating and subtle. But however, people who are trying to respond to Meillassoux are trying to say that he's over-interpreting Kant, as the majority of people do, as being a subjectivist. Where not, if you read the philosophy of science that was actually developed by people like Carnap in the Anglo-Saxon world, etc. So that's a philosophy that has nothing to do with speculation and whatnot, but that's a philosophy that has put into place what I call the logic of science. It's the whole thinking about, as I said, the major articulation between the formalism and the interpretation of the formalism. You can do it for mathematical theories. I mean, mathematics is not an invention by human beings, we agree? We tend to believe that mathematics exists independently of us. However, you can tell me it's not true because we decide what kind of axioms we want to choose for our mathematical theories. Therefore, if we decide them, therefore somebody, an agent, subject has decided them. And more importantly, somebody has to interpret then the results of the mathematical theory in terms of what is true, what is not, etc. So this whole idea of articulating a syntax is not human because it's syntax. I mean, it's symbols, or maybe you will disagree. But articulating the logic between the syntax and the semantics. There are people in the Anglo-Saxon world who are actually who have reread Kant in saying that that was Kant's problem, but he might not been able to formulate it in those terms in his days because he didn't have the meta-mathematics, etc. But that's the interesting problem, is the relation between syntax and semantics, between the theory and the interpretation of theory. And that is independent, that's the difficulty, that's independent of the human finitude or human subjectivity. Okay? So, for instance, if you take, and this will take me to Meillassoux, if we take set theory, so set theory is a very important thing because it's at the very basics of mathematics. So set theory, I mean, it's a human invention in the sense that somebody eventually had to find the axiom, but actually it's so sublime when you have it that you have to think that no, it's not an invention. I mean, we discovered set theory. Yet in set theory, there are decisions that have to be made right at the beginning of the axioms, which are decisions that only the guy who's writing the theory could make. For instance, should we include the axiom of choice or not in set theory? Whatever. So in the end, it's pure convention that we decided in what is known today as set theory to include the axiom of choice. We could have not included it, and we could have ended up with a different theory than set theory. So it's pure agreement, pure convention between us mathematicians that we have included the axiom of choice in set theory. However, and this is where the point where we get to Meillassoux, the fact that that is a convention is not a convention. So once you rise to the level of meta thinking about the mathematical theory, and you realize at that level that fine, at the object level, if you will, it's a convention what kind of syntax I use, what kind of formalism I use, so that's a convention. But if you rise above that and to the second level, if you will, of the thinking, and you think the fact that it is a convention is not a convention, here you get a kind of absolute truth. And my rereading of Meillassoux is this. My reading of Meillassoux is to say, well, and this will be my last slide. So Meillassoux, obviously, if you read his book, although he wants to argue against what he calls the correlational circle in which Kant has locked us, even though he wants to argue against Kant in making us only, look at things through thought, and Meillassoux wants to liberate the access to the absolute and to the world from the circle of thinking, so that's his project. But when he does so, he does not go counter to Kant. It's very important because he does not want to go back, Meillassoux, to the speculative ideal of Leibniz or the dogmatic philosophers that ultimately believe in God, because ultimately the speculative philosophers, a la Leibniz, will ultimately have to attach everything to a supreme absolute being, which is God, and ultimately tell you this is the last resort or the last answer. So we don't want to go back to that kind of speculation. So Meillassoux doesn't want to go back to a pre-Kantian kind of speculation. The very clever movement gesture in Meillassoux is through the work of Kant to find, as he says, a crack inside the correlation circle of Kant to get to the absolute. And what is it? It's the fact that, okay, fine, if I want to believe Kant, it's always the case that I have a subject and an object, because otherwise I cannot have science and I cannot have a theory and interpretation of this theory. And surely this configuration of science that we have is contingent, because we could have been made up differently than we are, and we could have not even have space or time. Imagine aliens that live without space or time. So it is completely contingent, that kind of relation between subject and object. However, the fact that it's contingent is not the absolute, is not contingent. So that's what I call the speculative crux in Meillassoux. So for instance, people tell him that no, we know from quantum mechanics that it's the subject that interferes in the physical experiment in quantum mechanics. So people have argued against Meillassoux by telling him the conclusions of quantum mechanics is that definitely the results of experiment depend on the subject, are not true in themselves. So his answer is to say, fine, I agree with you, but the fact that it is the case, that is absolute then. So he moves to the second level, and it is there that he places his speculative pointer, if you will. Okay.
Then can you sum up the equivalence between the financial and the metaphysical then?
Yeah.
Being that you can, if you're looking for a sort of ideology or a rule, the paradox is you can never get enough levels out,
yes,
or enough dimensions. You can never add enough dimensions to the financial graph.
Yeah.
And you can never add enough dimensions to the levels beyond subject and object. Is that
Yeah, I mean, my interpretation of why...
or there are infinite dimensions or levels.
Yeah, so my interpretation of the gesture of Meillassoux, because I told you that Meillassoux was key at the beginning in giving me the philosophical matrix that I needed to interpret my own philosophy of finance. What I liked a lot about Meillassoux is the fact that he, as I said, integrated the idea that I don't want to go back to a speculation a la Leibniz. So the way I describe it is to say that if we go back to the old idea of the absolute as the absolute, which is God, if you will, and which says that the world exists before man came into existence, and somehow man and philosophers have inherited the impossible task of thinking the absolute, so it's as if the absolute was beyond me and before me, etc. However, now that I exist, I have to think it philosophically. So as if that it's a debt that I owe to the absolute, because I need to redeem myself and think the absolute. However, it's an impossible debt to redeem, because how can I think the absolute without thinking it, because I'm thinking? So there's a kind of impossibility here, which to me is bad, and this is why I call the absolute and the bad infinity. And to me, the financial interpretation of that is that it's as if I owe a debt to the absolute that I don't want to redeem. Whereas the way forward in my thinking of the markets is no longer to think in terms of debt and in terms of the past, because a debt is something that is in your past. You have, ideally the debt, you have to go back in time to redeem the debt, or die and don't redeem it, is to go forward. So my whole reading of the markets, if you remember, is going forward and to say that the future is ahead. And this is why I like in Meillassoux the fact that he moved, even though he wants the absolute, okay, but he moves from the schema of owing to the past, moving forward by doing his gesture, by moving outside of Kant, and this is why there is speculation and good infinity, because typically he wants to go beyond Kant and beyond the finitude of the correlation circle. However, how he manages to do it, and this is will be my last comment and bring me back to derivatives, is to say that when he recognizes that if thought has to move to the extra level and to think that the thing that is absolute ultimately is contingency itself, then he, to my mind, rather quickly concludes that therefore everything is contingent. And Meyasu has been interpreted as saying, well, it's chaos everywhere, etc. But that's not very interesting. What is interesting to me is that the fact that he says that contingencies should come first is what is interesting to me, because I read him as saying, so contingency is the basic ontology in Meyasu. So he is no longer relying on the fact that to think the universe and the world I have to think what is the case, what exists, what is. So it's not the verb to be that counts, but the verb can be. So can be meaning to be can be different, meaning can be contingent. So if you think back to Leibniz, which we are trying to fight more or less. So in Leibniz, a thing is contingent if it can be in state A, state B, state C, or not be at all. So always in Leibniz you have a kind of enumerations of the states, of the possible words that you have to somehow enumerate in mind before. So in finance, it's as if I'm saying I have to have an algorithm that has mapped out for me all different possibilities before I can then conclude that the thing is contingent. Whereas Meyasu is saying, no, I don't want to make contingency derivative on the notion of state. I don't want to have states first and say that the thing is contingent if it's not in state 1 or 2 or 3 or not at all. I want to make contingency first, meaning to say that the thing is contingent is the following, is to say it can be in state A, state B, state C, or not be at all. So instead of saying in this 4 different propositions, to think that it's one proposition, no longer extensively, but intensity, one proposition which is the thing is contingent. So this overturning of the ontology is, to me, looking from the modest point of view of derivatives, is to say that it is overturning the probabilistic schema of thinking where I think of probability and the movement between states in terms of states of the world a la Leibniz, to moving to the other, to overturning this and putting the price of contingent claims, meaning contingency, first. So we don't have the time here, but if I were to rerun for you the fact of putting the prices of derivatives as the basic thing that finance should feed on rather than the algorithmic trading, we end up in a kind of same gesture as Meyasu was putting contingency below the states.
Okay. So do you sort of see what you model, or not model, the software as being this like infinite contingency, which is probably the best example of Meyasu, is what
Yes, exactly.
You're saying you found the best example of Meyasu in the market.
Exactly. This is what I tried to argue in my first book, but apparently this was not very popular with Meyasu, because Meyasu is a leftist philosopher, so he really was bad news for him that I should have found in finance a direct consequence of his philosophy. So, but yeah, exactly. To me, the existence of the market of contingent claims was a direct illustration of the kind of daring metaphysical overturning that Meyasu is proposing in his philosophy.
Yeah,
but again,
you can really see why it is interesting to read Meyasu and sort of speculation in general through a sort of a general speculation, general sort of cynicism, if not like hatred of the market and the influence that it has on our lives. The fact that speculation as a philosophy is quite often like placed against sort of like new materialism and these kinds of like more sort of like alternative forms of humanism, that like post-humanism. Where I know the comparison that I would make is like, well, the market might think that the way the market reads value is random at every single moment. But those values are values that are put on companies which have labour forces who are not contingent and are obviously, so world events, for example, affect prices and cause things to flock. And so it's like the new materialist view would be like you can speculate upwards and find randomness and contingency, but at the end of the day, the materials have agency. Like it's just like that's. I can sort of see that.
Yeah, I mean, I have been myself sometimes misinterpreted as saying that contingency rules, everything goes. No. Ultimately, as I argued all day, all night long, is that I'm against algorithmic trading and the machine. I told you that the sheer existence of derivative markets is a direct argument against algorithmic trading. So you might ask me, so then what do you have? It's the market maker. I kept mentioning the market maker who makes the market. So to me, my whole argument is, in the end, trying to argue that human beings have to be the end of the chain. You cannot put the trading of the market in hands of machines. Now, I agree with you that we are talking about derivatives that are completely disembodied from the companies and the labor force, etc. So you have to grant me first the existence of financial markets and why we need it, etc. You may not agree that you should have a financial market, but once...
Oh, yeah, that was a good point. I was just sort of using your model to sort of talk about the people who might critique speculation.
Yeah, I know. I'm aware of that. But strange enough, my whole argument is to say that once you grant me that we need financial markets, which, are an abstraction of the labor force, and, according to Kant, the commodity form is the first abstraction, and now with derivatives we are up one level in the abstraction, so that is very bad because we are disconnected from the real world, etc. I don't think we are, because derivatives are looking into the future. But once you grant me that, my point is not to say that we are post-human and post-machinic and whatever. My point is to put the coal miners that I encountered in my life, who were the market makers who were trading in the pits. So I'm arguing ultimately for the fact that you have people gathering in the trading pits, and the pit is the same word for the coal pit and the market pits, which ultimately are making the market. Why? Because contingency and randomness of that level is too serious to be handed over to a machine, according to me. Because of the infinite argument that tells you that ultimately no contingency or no randomness can be boxed, which gives me the market. So the conclusion is that then the market has to be in the hands of market makers, because otherwise there's no end to the algorithm who would program the algorithm, The only way to end the regress is to have an actual market making decisions on the spot. And you tell me, how can you make decisions on the spot? Do you have an algorithm wired in your mind? And it's here that they become mystical. I say, no, you make decisions on the spot because this is what human beings are supposed to do, period. So it feels as if it's a very long story to tell you something that is very...
that's where contingency ends, basically, is it like in body and mind?
Yeah, you have to be gathering there on the floor and to have something which is beyond computation, which is the sheer fact that you exist there, being there, as a Heideggerian kind of, you are being there. Only that can end the regress and makes you advance in time and deal with contingency.
So is that like saying that you've got like the traditional market that's based on commodities and finite things?
Yes.
But then you've got this derivatives market that's destined to spiral upwards.
Yeah, it opens infinity, yeah.
Or you could say for certainty at a certain point that infinite market will crash because it's still inherently based on the finite market at the very base.
Yeah, of course you have bubbles.
So each layer of derivatives has a predictable amount of increased risk because it's still based on the finite.
I mean, you're absolutely correct. It's true that if you write financial futures, you can write them in infinite amounts, which go way beyond the actual amount of stock.
So does that mean that at some point it's certain that the market, how did you describe the market watcher?
Market maker.
Market maker.
The market maker will be at a point where you can't use that software to predict the next point. Because you can't say when the crash will happen.
Yeah, of
you can be
course.
sure that it will happen.
Yeah, I mean, you are referring to two things. You are telling me that derivatives, because you write them abstractly, they can, in the nominal size of derivatives that are...
I think what I mean is that because it's an infinite market, there could be more money in the infinite market than there is in the real market, you see what I mean?
No, there is no real and false market.
And if you let that happen, the market will certainly crash at some point in the future.
It has crashed on the subprime, for instance. No, again, derivatives are not written without a reason. So it's not that people are just amusing themselves and writing derivatives just for fun. No,
there has to be limits on it.
Yeah, but the limit.
Does that not make them not infinite?
Yeah. Speculatively speaking, it's infinite in my reasoning to tell you why I don't want any algorithm to be the end of story.
Yeah.
That's where I need infinity, and that's why in my reasoning I need the fact that there is no limitation, not the size, no limitation to the levels upon which you write derivatives. That to me is more important than the size of the derivatives. Okay. Now the size can eventually generate speculative bubbles, and the market would collapse, right? However, the derivatives that exist today, it's not that the people invent them. There are, of course, you have fades, like fashions that happens like with subprimes. However, the derivatives that I like, the ones where you have market makers engage on them every second, these are good derivatives in the sense that they are listed markets. You cannot make them up and they become liquid the next day. They become liquid through a very slow process of natural reasons why they should be liquid. Real reasons why the market needs the fact that I want VIX options and options written on them. So to me, it's a necessity that it comes naturally. It's not that people are just inventing new things that I can punt, That's the wrong view. Now with the subprime, it's not that people have invented the subprime just, to take money out of other people. When
they're putting invalid commodities together in a way of wrapping them up or something.
Yeah. When they invented them, first of all, the subprime were never traded on the exchange like I'm showing you.
Yeah.
So they were not liquid. So they are bad derivatives because they were only valued internally in the banks, etc.
It's like Paul Brandon,
I can't remember, but the major thing to keep in mind, because the subprimes have got everyone thinking the wrong ways about derivatives. When they invented the subprime, they were a good invention. It's not that somebody was ill-intentioned and wanted, to screw other people. They invented. No, they invented them because they felt that they can bring something to people with no income to buy houses, and they bundled those no-income kind of loans into something that they repackaged, and somebody would buy them, and eventually the guys would get their money. So it was a clever invention in allowing people to access the housing market. However, when it collapsed, is that it became so beneficial to the guys that invented them that all banks started writing them, and therefore there was a speculative bubble.
Because that's an immoral choice, and which is why you need more.
So it's speculative bubble because everyone wanted to issue subprimes, and therefore everyone was able to buy houses, and there was a speculative bubble like any time. Now, if you ask me whether speculative bubbles will happen, they will always happen. So, second rule, in the market, any market, because the market is speculated on the future.
But good sort of options would be always hedging against speculation, wouldn't they? So in a way they could be a good thing against bubbles.
Yeah, of course. Options that I deal with every day are options that are here to stay, because they date back to Bachelier, and even they date back 2,000 years. So those options are simple enough for them to be liquid in large numbers, like 1,200 of them every second. These are good options. They will never collapse, even though you can have market crashes, but it won't disappear the next day. People will lose money, but the next day the market will still be around. Derivatives like the subprimes were a different beast altogether, because they were so complex that only banks were able to find a value for them, which turned out to be completely wrong, because they put the wrong assumptions in their very complex models. But more importantly, they did not have a listed exchange on which to validate their model every second. Remember that in my case, I detonate my model every second. So every second I contradict the assumptions of the model of the second before. Was in the subprime, somebody priced them, and for years they remained priced like that in the books of the bank with no sanity check with the market. You've seen the margin call, the movie?
No.
It's exactly what happens at some point when they ask them, how long have we been outside the margin? And they said 5 weeks. When finally the calculation was made right by the guy. This situation cannot happen in the derivatives that I showed you, because every second, if you are out of line, you are completely arbitraged by the market itself. So constantly, the liquidity on the derivatives that we have brings you back in check. And the reason why they are liquid, to go back, is that because there are good derivatives that somehow the market has become sophisticated in the good sense of the word enough to require that you move up one level to vol, etc. So it's a good sense. And to me, it's because we have a technology here which is here to stay, because it's giving me new things, how I can manage my positions, etc. So there's a great literature about why you need derivatives in order to hedge, in order to place bets in the future, etc. So those are good derivatives. Okay? There is infinity in them, I agree. There is infinity in the size. However, because the market makers have to settle down their position every month or so, even though 1 million derivatives were written, we find that they settle them back and understand the derivatives, and the volumes reduce before every liquidation.
Last question, and then we're going to dinner to Etsu. If you want to complete the conversations, you're welcome to come with us. But last question in public. Great.
That's it. You don't have a question yourself.
Well, we totalized 1 hour and 50 minutes. I mean, pretty good.
But you said from 6 to 8.
No, but those no, it was 2 keywords, so fair enough, right? Pretty good.
Oh.